big fan of Disclosure. I think their debut album in 2013, Settle, is a fantastic release. A great blend of house, dance pop, UK garage, so many things blended into one album, and nearly every track pretty much hits, and they essentially nail everything that they're trying to do on that release, to the point where, for me, it was a major highlight for the 2010s in music overall. Strangely though, it didn't really make that many decade lists from music publications and music critics out there. I never really saw it get mentioned amongst some of the best of the 2010s, but for me it was pretty easy to slot that in my favorite albums of the 2010s with ease, because I just think it is that bloody good. They were so huge at that time as well. It was so hard to escape Disclosure on the radio, at parties, at clubs, pubs, just in the UK. They were a huge impact, and every song on the album was like ready-made for the radio, ready-made for the club. They just had hit after hit after hit. They were massive. They had a huge start to their career in 2013. And it was good to see too, because the songs were really good. Their follow-up album didn't really quite have that same splash, that same impact, which is odd, because you just seem to expect that these guys were going to be in it for the long run. Although they still make festival bills, they still, headlining massive, arena tours across Europe, across the UK. They're still big, they're still massive, but they're not really smashing out the hits. And it's kind of easy to see why. Their second album was a bit of a letdown, even though I do think it's a bit better than people gave it credit for. But you can clearly see why people thought the quality difference was fairly significant. So of course, just based on the fact that I think their debut is so bloody good, I'm always looking out for what they're doing. It's been 5 years since their last album, although they have had quite a few EPs in that time, which I think have been pretty decent, to be fair. Not really being talked about again, but this album is kind of going for more of what we've seen them do before, where they have this variety of genres kind of splashed into one album, a huge A-list guest feature list. Plenty of recognizable names making this album here, plenty of names that you may not even know at all, which I think is pretty cool this time around, to see that they're definitely trying to broaden their horizons a little bit, include some names that are completely different to what they've done before, which I actually really appreciate. Best example of that is Duha Mali Mali with Fatuma Diawara. Just a really cool collaboration, like just really cool to see this kind of thing happen. Not something you've seen Disclosure do in the past, but the fact that they're willing to do something like this, I just really like to see that kind of combination of different artists coming together like this. Not exactly a favorite of mine though, because I love the bustling beat on this, but I do think the hook of Mali Mali, like the refrain, the repetition of that gets a bit stale by the end. But I kind of just like the fact that they did this, even if I'm not really huge on the song anyway. You've got Khalees on the opening track, Watch Your Step, which I think is a major highlight for the album. She sounds so at home on this track. She really brings that classic club flair in her vocals. It really sounds like this track was birthed out of the 90s, and it's been around for years, and this is just like a house staple that you've heard at clubs for like nearly 30 years at this point. It really just has that feel to it, which I think is great. It's the exact same with Amine on My High, another artist that doesn't really do these kind of songs, but my God, if you didn't know who he was, you'd think that this is just his style, because he is so in his bag on this track. He sounds fucking amped up. The hook is great. His verses are just phenomenal. He's just flowing so fast on these verses. It's just a great track. The beat sounds like mid to late 2000s Dizzy Rascal, and then Slowthai comes in later on the track and only adds to that vibe even further, because he is just emulating some of that kind of like goofiness that you got from Dizzy Rascal in that time period. Some of his lines are pretty poor though, with the "I wanna lick your caramel" thing that he says. That's probably the worst part of the track, but just there's so much to love about this. The energy, everything about the way that these guys are just kind of like working together on this track, it's just so good. I really like how it slows the hell down as well. About 2/3 into the track, it just kind of fizzles out, and then you start to hear it come back in again. Oh, that part's so great. My God. I just want to hear Aminé do more songs like this, actually. Like, this is a great track. And to be honest, at first, I wasn't really that big on it, but it's only really grown on me more, and it might be one of my favorite songs of the year now. But this is what Disclosure do best. They just bring these artists on their tracks, know how to provide a beat that just fits their style somehow perfectly, and brings out the best in artists. They were doing it with Sam Smith for years as well. An artist that I almost never cared for in a solo capacity, but whenever you see a Sam Smith Disclosure collaboration, you are ready to stop what you're doing and play that shit, because it's gonna be a slapper. We have Mick Jenkins, which is quite an interesting collaboration on Who Knew. Mick Jenkins here, sounding like Sampha? I did not expect to ever say that Mick Jenkins and Sampha would sound alike, but somehow on this track that happens. Another example of where, again, an artist is just being pulled out of their comfort zone slightly and just being manipulated in a way that fits what Disclosure do, and they also add so much to what Disclosure are doing as well. Again, I keep repeating this, but that's just really what Disclosure have always done so well back in 2013 up until now. I love the atmospheric drum and bass that they're going for in this track. It really brings in a nice atmosphere for the album. Not every track goes for this style, but there's such a diversity and array of ideas going on in this album that it's really cool to see that Disclosure can do multiple things and do them to a really strong level. We once again get those vocal samples that we heard on When a Fire Starts to Burn back in 2013 on the track Energy, the title track. These samples come from Eric Thomas. I think the track that he was on in 2013 was a highlight on that album. 7 years later, the same guy being sampled here is another highlight for this album. The track just inspires you the hell to just go and do something amazing. It gets you so pumped up. Ooh. It's like the exact voice you need from a personal trainer just to get you to go the extra mile and lift those fucking weights and get those gains. Sadly though, there is a bit of a flip side to this album, because as positive as I am being, some of the collaborations don't really stick the landing. I don't really care for Blake Bassi on the track Say Nest Paz. You know what, I shouldn't have even attempted to say it. The vocals coming from this artist, I think, are just very thin throughout the track. I think once it hits that like climax of the song though, towards the end, it definitely starts grabbing my attention more, but up until that point I was just kind of waiting for more to happen. Didn't really get gripped by this singer's vocals. Not usually something I would say with a collaboration from Disclosure though, because usually they nail it, but I feel like this one's a bit of a miss. There's something a bit creepy about the vocals on the second track from Channel Tres. Not really feeling this. There's just something a bit weird about the way this guy is singing on here. And then later on, the final two tracks, which I kind of expected a bit more from, didn't really get me all that excited either. It's pretty typical R&B stuff from Kehlani and Syd, which, to be fair, you know, on their best days they can be really good at, but the instrumental just doesn't really excite me. I was expecting a little bit more. You know how usually they're pulling in these artists and bringing out something completely different in what they're doing, but it really does just sound like something Kehlani and Syd would do in their sleep, really, and it's just not that entertaining. And it was cool to see Common pop up on the final track, but it just feels a bit half-baked. This is actually technically the closing track if you're excluding all the deluxe bonus tracks and that sort of stuff. This is actually the final track on the album, which I am pretty underwhelmed by, I must admit. I do usually really like what Common brings, but here I don't really feel like it's that great of a way to close things off, especially with the album having so much energy throughout. I mean, what they set out to achieve on this album is mostly successful because it is a lot of high energy throughout, but then to end the album on a track that's the lowest energy really across the entire thing, I thought was a bit of a shame. But you know what, I do think overall it's a solid Disclosure release. There's so many great tracks scattered throughout that it's hard to say no to some of the best moments. Watch Your Step, My High, Energy, like these are great tracks, so good, up there with some of their best ever, I think. And I think overall it ends up being solid. It just has a few misses throughout which kind of drag the album down a little bit, which is a shame. But I still would go a 6 out of 10 with this. I think overall it's likable, and I do think there's great sparks coming out of this album, but it might be their weakest to date, honestly. I think this might be, out of the 3 albums they've put out, this might be the weakest, but still a solid effort. So thank you for watching my review. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something out of what I said here. If you agree, disagree, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this album. Have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already, and goodbye.